My name is Lisenne Delgado, and today I have the honor of having a conversation with Wendelien van Oldenborgh, Anna Dasovic, Ahmet Öğüt, and Pieter Paul Pothoven. We'll be talking about their works for the exhibition In the Presence of Absence. Like the title of the exhibition suggests, all the work included put us in the presence of histories, stories, and experiences that we normally cannot or insufficiently find in spaces such as the museum. Today we'll be talking about taking space, taking place. We will touching upon social critique, the relation between the private and the public, and also the space that is the museum. Now, before we start the conversation, let me briefly introduce your work to the viewer at home. Wendelien van Oldenborgh exhibits a film installation in two parts titled Prologue, Squat, Anti-Squat. The film shows a group of individuals from different generations who all have background in activism and or architecture. They are in a tripolis office building designed by Aldo van Eyck. They discuss topics ranging from changing views on housing and property and decolonization, diversity, and racism. They also highlight squatting actions in the 70s and in 2016. The building is an intrinsic part of the conversation as Van Eyck's architecture asks us how we can learn together, coexist, and cohabitate. Ahmet Öğüt is inspired by the anarchist thinker Mikhail Bakunin, and he created Bakunin's barricade. It is a barricade made of fencing, car racks, construction materials, and other objects that might be encountered in public space, and several artworks from the Stedelijk collection. Part of Ahmet's work is a contract that states that if an uprising takes place in the future, citizens are permitted to make use of the barricade, including the works of art. This permission of use only comes into effect if the museum signs the contract to purchase Ahmet's work. Pieter Paul Pothoven's Facade Suspended and Observatie contra Observatie are part of a research project on the revolutionary anti-racist action RARA. RARA fought against the ongoing legacy of Dutch imperialist history that is racism, oppression, and exploitation. Facade Suspended is a full-size reproduction of a storefront in Amsterdam in which members of multiple RARA actions allegedly lived. Central to Observatie contra Observatie is a spoken monologue. Speaking from the perspectives of RARA members, it is an account of the 1985 RARA attack on a branch of the Macro. This action forced Macro's parent company to pull out of apartheid South Africa. Then Anna Dasovic's installation is entitled Before the Fall, There Was No Fall, Episode 1, Raw Material. The installation shows how the Royal Netherlands Army deployed language and roleplay to prepare Dutch UN soldiers for peacekeeping missions in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The peacekeeping mission is infamously known for letting the murder of Bosnian Muslim men and boys and deportation of Bosnian Muslim women and girls happen without interfering. For the installation, Anna uses a combination of texts from the 1994 Former Yugoslavia Handbook and raw video material from an archive of the Dutch Ministry of Defense. Based also on these materials, Daswich argues that racist excesses within the Royal Netherlands Army are partly the consequence of a military culture that has been distorted by immaterial associations rooted deep in the Dutch colonial past. First of all, thank you for being here today with us. I think that we can say that all of your work is so timely now that we've seen uprisings around the world, also after the murder of George Floyd. And after that, we saw also in the Netherlands demonstrations in forms and sizes that we have not seen the last decades, I can say. And all of your works touch upon themes that were discussed then and continuingly until now. All your work are very much a social critique, I think I can say, and explicit in that. Also confrontational in different degrees. What do you think is the role of art and artists as yourself in social critique? Anna, maybe first?
I don't know if art is a place of social critique, or the exhibition space is a place of. There are all these assumptions around this idea that a white cube would be such a space, and I'm not exactly too sure of that. What I do think is that maybe the art space is a space that allows people to engage with material outside of a certain context, like media or the newspaper, or in a way it's a space that exists beyond or outside of public space. And so maybe it is a space for an encounter of questions and material and topics outside of that. I wouldn't be so sure that my work is social critique, even if I would hope so.
You do ask very critical questions in your work, and I think that the work itself also triggers critical questions. At least that's what it did to me. How would you then see that? Because, as I said, I saw it as a social critique, but you don't necessarily see it like that. How do you perceive it?
I think it brings something to me personally. It brings something to the fore about. I mean, we're speaking today about the idea of knowledge and the things we know. I think if there's one thing that's really clear in this material is that these men that we see recorded in this exercise in 1994 is that there are a lot of things they did not know. And what they were taught is, in the most positive sense, questionable. So I think what is interesting to me in these videos is that you see a form of embodied knowledge by these young, in most cases, white male soldiers that are performing something that they don't know. And what they know or what they think to know is not even remotely close to the reality. And of course that is a confrontation when you see that. And I hope maybe that's a bodily confrontation as a visitor. That you are confronted with a group of people that exactly do not know a lot of things. And what they know is inaccurate.
And then that is used in the trainings, which is interesting. Thank you. Maybe Ahmet?
So the question of social critique, I think a lot of these four artworks that are in the show that goes one step forward. You know, in general, what art claims most of the time just a critique of things, or make even in a symbolical level only. But I see in all these works the way it's done, the way they are done, and especially the one I have in the show also that I can talk about it specifically. It's really thinking about not only past, present, but also future possibilities of re-engagement with life. So we don't really only exist in an exhibition space at the time now, especially in this time that you cannot even enter sometimes inside. But it is the notion. So the notion is also about past and future. So if you think clearly, just Wonderstraat was just around the corner of Stedelijk Museum. In 1980 March, there was barricades and tanks on the street in Netherlands, you know, not so long ago, trying to destroy the barricades. That was done by the squatters. Quite an important piece of information, thinking that the museum is not that far from the reality and everyday life, and it becomes quite critical. So I don't really see those works that in a symbolical level, and also just as a social critique. It is an act, and this act is try to claim what comes next, and what comes next is this responsibility of the cultural heritage and the role of cultural heritage in times of crisis. So the museum is not there only when there's good time, good weather, but museum is there also when there is bad weather and not good times, and ups and downs. So this difference and the role that is changing according to what's happening just around the corner sometimes, it is the definition of the museum, it is the definition of the artwork. That's why I try to insert it, speculating the future possibilities of things going completely unexpected different direction, as it did only 30 years ago, 40 years ago, or not so long ago.
I like how you introduced the idea of life, that the museum and art should be part of life and is part of life. And actually you mentioned being aware of what's happening around the corner. Yesterday we had a couple of conversations here too, and around the corner there was a demonstration on abortion rights. Which makes it very interesting also in connection to your work, what we'll be talking about later on more, I think. Pieter Paul,
Hi.
do you want to reflect on this question?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to thank you for the introduction. And I also, it's funny, Ahmet spoke about the demonstration and with the barricades in the 1980s. My work involves Rara, and they were actually also part of that barricade in the Vondelstraat. It was a turning point in the squatting scene. A lot of people left the scene at that moment, or they quote unquote radicalized. So it was a key point. I also would like to thank Anna for what she said. I think I think there's a lot of things possible within the institutional space, but there's also a lot of things that are not possible. And let's not focus on all the things that are not possible or are difficult with the space. But what is interesting for me, that within this institutional context, I have a certain mobility as a maker, which I wouldn't have if I would be a journalist or a historian. These fields their main focus is on demystification, on a clear lineage between different points in history. And I feel that within an art context, you can choose a different working method. For example, the activist collective that I've been collaborating with, or that I am collaborating with, they are surrounded on purpose with a lot of mystery, and within journalism and academic ways of history writing, there's been a lot of efforts to demystify this group, who did what, where, on which location, at what time, etc., etc. And I think within an art context, I actually benefit from the mystery that they've been surrounded in. So on the one hand, I have been able to, for the first time in 35 years, I've been able to tell this history like in detail, but with maintaining the mystery, which was one of the, one of the rules of engagement with this collective. And also what is interesting to me is that, for example, in a German institutional context, there has been a long history of engaging with left-wing activism. For example, Beuys, Richter, and a lot of other artists have been actively engaging with the history of the Rote Armee Fraktion. But actually in the Netherlands, this tradition is not there. So that's also why I thought it was important to do this in this space.
Thank you. Wendelien.
Yeah, hi.
I see you smiling.
Yes, a lot of things have been said that are important to me as well. So I'm grateful to the others to already cover that ground. Maybe I can add something in the terms of the way that I think making art and presenting art is also connected to life. In the way that I produce these works, I think the moment of production is as important maybe as the moment of presentation. Although I would say the moment of presentation becomes productive as well. Also in this idea of interaction with viewers. But when I made this particular work, for instance, which deals with a lesser known squatting action from the 1970s, where a large group of Afro-Caribbean Dutch people have squatted and have had an incredible big squatting action that is super covered over in the squatting history of Amsterdam. And this was like a starting point for conversation, but it also on the day of shooting, making this piece, it became a conversation between the participants that was also about exchanging knowledge. There were different generations there and different people from different sides of actually all involved in these kind of things, but there was a very important exchange of information and also culture that hadn't been really covered that much in the last, let's say, 30 years since that activist action took place. So I think these and these things by themselves were important because of that, certain other products started to travel, like the film by André Reder about the, which was actually one of the reasons. So it was about the very bad conditions of how people from the Suriname region were housed in their immigration to the Netherlands in the 1970s. And this was a film he made in 1982. And that had not, I mean, it hadn't been really been traveling that much, but after our filming, it has taken up much more space and it's been much more in public. So I think these things are as important as the work developing and then being also in a place where it can sort of have its effect on how people see things, how people have experienced the memory of things and how things are remembered actually and discussed. So I think that's, and I agree totally also with Pieter Paul that art and art making gives this space to do things in a very different way. I mean, the same as Anna's mentioning, than the media or a journalistic or a documentary way of dealing with those things. So it can be an introduction of much more affect and much more stories that are not all informative, but also carry other values.
Talking about exchange of knowledge, can you maybe expand a bit more on the value for you of having the conversations in the Van Eyck building, or I should say AAA's office building?
You mean that to take the space into account?
Yes, because there is a real reason why you chose for that space where you let these conversations happen. Can you maybe expand on that, on the reasons why? And
that, yeah, the building was, yes, I chose that building as my location for these conversations, and even an exploration of the topics in other ways than the conversations, because that building had been squatted a few months earlier by the action group We Are Here. And it came to my knowledge that they'd squatted that building, and I thought it was very beautiful because it is, I think it's nice when certain things come together, like the cultural history, important cultural history of the Netherlands, which is architecture, and a figure like Aldo van Eyck playing a role in that. And then this kind of search for space and search for acknowledgement that intersects with it in that moment. And then at the same time, it also intersected with a very difficult and painful sort of continuous history after squatting, which is the anti-squat, let's say, development, which is an economic development. And so, because part of the building was occupied by anti-squat, let's say, caretakers, I mean, this is very complex, I think, to, not complex at all, but it sometimes gets this sort of funny intersection where it is seen almost as a similar lifestyle, but at the same time, it's like the opposite of agency, no? The people that are somehow forced or choosing to live in these conditions are much more agents of property protection and speculation rising and so on. So that in itself gave another topic to speak about in that situation. So I think the location, then apart from its spatial sort of satisfaction or what it can do spatially, it also offers a lot of topics.
Yes, thank you for that answer. Both Ahmet and Pieter Paul, you just said, Pieter Paul, or you mentioned the idea of what is and what is not possible within the space of the museum. And I think both of your works are very much about that in different ways. So I would like to ask to you both, Ahmet and Pieter Paul, what does it mean for you that your work is now part of an exhibition in this museum?
May I start, Peter?
Sure.
Yeah.
The floor is all yours.
Yeah, okay. Well, you know, it's as long as it is my work, I also don't see it as my work. I see it as a collective responsibility to put something in a museum, you know. Why do we produce more? Why do we put something more in a museum? Well, at the end, some of these artworks become even part of the collection. It's even a bigger responsibility. So I already think of those ideas as an outsider, even when it comes to my own work. The way I also look at the other work as well. I think every time we add something, you know, it becomes part of this general common heritage. And common heritage is so that's why museums are there as well. It's this responsibility. It's not only the responsibility of the current director or curators or artists that are exhibiting at that moment there, but certain things were, let's say, at the end of 1800 was very normal, you know, all these like colonial exhibitions, let's say, that was done in the museum square or in the Rembrandt Square in Amsterdam, which would be impossible right now to think it's normal. So things are changing, and at the time it looked normal by the agents of the people who think that is part of the cult, heritage and so on. Now it could be very offending as well. So things are changing. So we really need to think about the future in a way that we are responsible of the ones that comes in the future. And how do we explain these things, that not that they have to solve them later. So if you think of this responsibility and awareness all the time, that means I don't only see that my work is part of an exhibition. That's why there is this contract. That's why the idea, I also want to correct one thing, that there are other artworks, original artworks from the collection on the barricade, but it is not my permission to give people to take these artworks that are already part of the museum collection. I can only initiate the platform to negotiate that. And at the time, if it is a time of war, it's a time of depends on the scale of the crisis, museum might completely change the function. So if we remember that there was times this very same museum had to hide artworks in caves in order to protect them instead of its own storage, that's very unlikely that it's not that I am giving this original artworks once it is part of the collection to the people when there is an uprising, but actually museum might have to decide to do that in order to actually, protect something even, greater. And also it's not about the destruction of the paintings. It's like this respect that we have cross-generational towards the museum, towards art, and the role and the notion of that. And its notion is never limited to art itself.
Thank you. Pieter Paul, you just mentioned the idea of the possibilities and the possibilities that you have not within a museum. And I wonder what it means for you then that your work is now part of this exhibition in the museum.
Well, I think this is not an easy question, because I mean there's a lot of experience to it. First of all, I'm very happy to be selected to be part of this. I mean, this is a very small individual pleasure that I experienced. But there's many layers. For example, I really liked what Wendelien said, that there's not a lot of fields where you can add effect to an history or to a story that you tell. And I think the fact that I've been able to convey this specific story about Rara in the Stedelijk has been affected quite a lot of people. For example, the people that were involved in these actions, of course, we went to the Stedelijk, and we visited the work and we listened to the work. And for them, it was really meaningful because it was the first time in 35 years that they somehow heard themselves speak, or it was weird, like a balance between hearing a story and re-experiencing a certain history. And that was a very special moment. Also, not a small funny anecdote on the side. We also looked at Wendelien's work, and even a lot of these Rara figures, which are like diehard squatters, even they didn't know about the group of squatters in Amsterdam Zuidoost. So this was, yeah. So for them, it's really meaningful, and I also really like that a lot of people went to the Stedelijk to figure out what happened with Rara. Even as you know, the Elsevier, they dropped by and they continued their their battle, the ongoing battle with Rara. And so I don't know. It's a very layered experience. Yeah.
You just mentioned representation. You chose to also have this monologue very much from the perspective of Rara members. What was your choice of, why this choice of having their perspective as central in the exhibition or in your works, I have to say?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that led to this choice. There's a lot of information to find on Rara. There's like Secret Service reports that have been published in 2010. There's documentaries. Rara is not, especially for a certain generation, Rara was like daily news for pretty much a while. But something that is really missing is from which perspective this history is told.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really interested in, all the political motivations are well known because they publish texts, but I was also really interested in what does it mean personally to do these things, unlike this, and how does it affect your life, not affect your life. And I could only do this by coming really close to the people that were involved and somehow together write this story. Is that an answer?
I think so.
Okay.
Thank you for it.
Sure.
Continuing on the idea of representation, Anna, but then from a different angle, I think. In your work, we see how this image of the other plays a role in trainings of Dutch soldiers. And for this, you use raw footage from the Ministry of Defense. I understand that there is a whole story behind obtaining this footage. Can you maybe expand on this too, also in relation to the importance of showing the footage that you used?
Actually, it started quite naively when looking for other material, and I just sent an email now 7 years ago to archive of the Dutch military, and I got confronted immediately with a what we call WOB adviseur, that is a person that deals with Freedom of Information Act requests. So quite immediately, actually, the Dutch Ministry of Defense themselves confronted me with this idea that there are all kinds of things that do not reside in the public. That I was specifically looking for something that I knew existed. And because of the very fact that the Dutch Ministry of the Defense, instead of somebody working in the archive responding to me, and a person like that, I was confronted with the fact that there are things that do not reside in the public. And so I filed a request for material amongst with this footage. And this has been a really long process that took almost 5 years of getting this footage out of the archive. This is partly because the Freedom of Information Act law, the WOB, functions actually quite well in the Netherlands, but it doesn't really specify how things should become public. So the longest part of the negotiation was about actually getting the material digitized and getting it on a hard drive. I don't know if that answers your question, or if I should rephrase it.
I think so. I was wondering indeed about if there's a relation between the information that the videos show and the reason why it took so long eventually for you to obtain the footage. So
I have wondered that. I actually don't think so. Interestingly enough, I mean, partly I think so. I think this is one of the most. If we talk about like the recent history of the Dutch Royal Army and its importance for the idea of a Dutch self-image, what happened in 1995 in Srebrenica is a very important moment and is considered to be a Dutch collective trauma. And so any kind of material trace that has a direct relationship to that is treated like toxic material and is something that the Dutch state wishes not to see in public space. So to that extent, yes, I think there is a relationship. But I was frankly really surprised when I finally got the footage. It's 100 videotapes that amounts to about 60 hours of original material. I was frankly very surprised that they released it at all. And I don't really think that they actually looked at the material themselves and cared to understand what kind of knowledge those videotapes would carry. And I think this is a really interesting kind of contradiction.
yes, I also do wonder if they understood the knowledge that they made public in this way and that you now shared with us.
I don't think so, and I think this has to do with this idea that the discourse around this particular event has been going about responsibility and about establishing facts. And this is interesting in these videos because it only portrays a very absurd embodied form of knowledge that's very unstable, that is not considered to be factual at all. And I think this is something interesting in relation to the whole way we see knowledge actually, as consisting of this idea of facts and building on facts that determine something. And for that reason, I think it is important to show it in an exhibition space, and that is the potential of the exhibition space. This is not about fact building. This is about
I think so too.
Or embodying certain forms of knowledge that are unstable and that are carried by the body, maybe, and that we can encounter with our bodies in a space.
Thank you. Continuing on material, Ahmet, I was wondering, you probably carefully chose the artworks that you included in the barricade. And I see you doing like this. So, so I wonder, how do you choose them?
It's not just me alone. So it's a process. It was, I think, a process of almost a year of conversation, negotiation. And, you know, in an exhibition is not only made of the curator and the artist and the public. There's like technicians, security guards, especially in a museum like Stedelijk Museum, there are so many departments. So there's head of everything, you know. So you have to go through and really conceptually discuss and understand the work together, especially a work like this that also involved the lawyers of the museum. So we were just talking about in Anna's work as well, you know, how long it takes. It can also take long in an institution to involve everybody to understand a conception of a work like that, because a museum is made of everybody. And this was an interesting process. Also choosing the artworks, you know, there are like political discussion, technical discussion, it was one of the few works that really brings together head of printing department, painting department, you know, and storage. I went to visit the storage building, sculpture department. So there was different people and they all had different ideas. And also there was external installers and internal installers, you know, semi-contractor, full contractor. So all these people involved. And the last conversation I had was like, after all the selection process happened, and there was a lot of things we couldn't even get for multiple reasons. It's even hard to imagine, but then you just keep trying, and everyone keeps trying that how to make such work possible internally, and then later imagine how it could be possible in the future externally. So it's whole of a journey. And then I saw this security guard. He came after everything was installed, and he said it took him. He was thinking about it 2 days. Like everything he's made of was against a work like this. Like he wants to protect those paintings, be in the space all the time. And he himself had to teach himself how to understand the concept of the work. Then he was really, he could explain the work in a level that I can't, like better than I can explain. So this is the important thing for me, like involvement of everyone and understanding of everyone, that it is not an artist come and have some wishes and try to make something happen. It's like, what is the role of everyone involved? So selection of painting process is absolutely part of this, which paintings comes as well. It really represents the political decisions that was made by the former directors of the museums, you know, the number of female artists to artists of color to all kinds of criteria you can think of to make of a collection, you know, of over many, many years. And clearly, people 100 years ago, they were not thinking the way we are thinking now, and maybe in 50 years it won't be exactly the same. We just wish for a more liberated way of thinking, more inclusive way of thinking.
Yeah, I like how in all of your answers, you, in different degrees, highlight this idea of a joint effort and all these different people who are involved, and also the exchange of knowledge that happens, or in the case of Anna, maybe the unconscious perception of knowledge that is transferred. I just wanted to touch upon one thing concerning materials still, Pieter Paul, the storefront. What is it made of? I mean, I know, but can you please tell us a bit more about it?
Yes, the storefront is made from 17th and 18th century East VOC. I'm never sure. It's East India Company shipping chests. So basically, from the moment that the VOC occupied Java, they start deforesting the island, and teak wood has always been a very significant Dutch colonial product. And in the 17th and 18th century, high-ranking VOC officials, they brought their private property and illicit trade goods in these chests to the Netherlands. So they're rather big, 150 in length, and really heavy. So I looked all around, and I bought 5 in very different places. One on Marktplaats from a person that didn't know what kind of chest it was, and one on, for example, also one on the TEFAF in an art fair, antique fair in Maastricht. And I really wanted to have this chest because it has a VOC Amsterdam stamp on it. And you can also see it in the facade on the back. You can see this VOC A logo. Yeah.
Yeah, I found it very interesting how even in the use of that material, you bring to the fore again the colonial past, the Dutch colonial past.
Can I say one thing about that?
Of course.
Yeah, well, it's hard to say because the facade itself doesn't say so much about the history of Rara, but the way it is built, I think, says a lot about Rara, because what Rara did was literally attacking the economic structures that result from Dutch imperial history. And to me, these shipping chests are such a symbol of like accumulation of wealth during the colonial era, and by breaking open these enclosures, I feel that gesture echoes a lot of what Rara did. So basically, the frame. It's in a way you could see it as a frame for a story that is told by the radios. I'm not 100% sure about this, but it's just more of a frame you can look through. Yeah,
for the visitors to experience. Thank you. I see that activists play an important role in your work, Pieter Paul, and Ahmet, your work, and also in your work, Wendelien. Can I say that activists play a central role in your work? And if so, what is your choice for this why this choice for this specific group of people?
In this work, they certainly play a central role. I was in this work, I was looking for people who were directly related to the squatting action of the 70s that I knew about, but as I said, it was hard to find traces back. And then I came across these a few members of the group that was active between 1970 and 1985 or something, called the Lozon. And I started to converse with them, and through that, I understood what kind of big role they had also played in supporting the action. They were not the squatters themselves, but they had been supporting these actions. And I learned much more about this history, because actually it was at the time not isolated. They were supported by white squatters as well. Like the Newmarket squatters were also supporting these squatting actions. And it was just a political tool to get more official living spaces for the people that came in. But it didn't actually gain that, therefore it was perpetuated. So they stayed squats for many years. But so just to come back to the central role of activists, in this case, I was just very interested in also hearing about the presence of these groups of anti-racist activists, activists from the Suriname region, activists from like Black feminists and people from colonial backgrounds in the Netherlands. Again, it's actually a subject that we know very little about. If you think about pasts of activism and maybe political endeavors, or like movements and playing a role in public space towards political issues, we don't really see these groups at all. So again, I was coming across something that was has been there all the time. And of course it has to do with the moment that I was making it, where it became much more visible again, that younger people are standing up and making a lot of more claims. But it doesn't come isolated. It comes in a history of, and that's why it was so nice to invite these members from other generation that had been active since the 50s, actually, because even 50s, 60s, like Helen Felter. The fact that they were there and that they actually also opened, Helen Felter was really already known. She's had a very big role in the continuous talks in the UN, actually, with the mission of putting forward female issues and especially women of color issues from the Dutch region. So she's been really continuously in very important roles. And that they could, like, they met with people that are active now, and some things were known and some things were completely not known. Even they had like been interrupted by other moments in history where things have become, maybe more comfortable, and people have not been continuously telling each other about these methods and about the ways that things were already being fought and being struggled in other times. And what I also really particularly liked was that the activists from the low zone were really strong Marxists and coming with very clear ideas about how solidarity worked internationally at the time, etc., which was really important to hear in a time like this.
I wonder if for you, the choice of having the activists speaking themselves and amongst themselves is also a way for you to have them represent themselves in the way that they want.
Of course. I was thinking about that when you had your other question about representation, because it's a big issue for me. What is representation, and how does one include people in a work? How can you make a form? How can one achieve a form in which we talk about presentation and not about representation? And so, yes, I struggle with this and I work with this. Of course, one of the methods is to indeed not have anything ready to do, but let it generate by itself and let the people completely take their own agency for speaking within that situation and within that moment of filming.
I think this is a perfect note to end our conversation with. Thank you very much, Wendelien, Ahmet, Anna, and Pieter Paul. I really enjoyed this. I hope this is a start for further conversations. I know that you've been talking about your works in other spaces as well. So please continue doing this. This is very nice to hear what you're doing with your work and what you have been able to reach already. People at home, also thank you for joining us today.